This is 16 to 1, a podcast about education, teaching, and learning.
What's going on?
Hey, how you doing?
Woo!
How you feeling?
So much better.
Okay.
Significantly better.
I'm feeling better too.
I mean, we're still in the middle of a pandemic.
Right.
But aside from that,
Yeah,
much better.
I'm downright energetic.
I would, venture to say that I'm willing to do more things than I've ever been willing to do before.
Yeah, this is our first post-election podcast recording sesh.
I was not feeling this good 2 weeks ago.
No.
Let me just say.
No. So yeah, I feel much better. What are we drinking this evening?
Fiji.
Fiji. Bouge water. And I'm drinking G Fuel. Because I'm a 14-year-old boy.
Need Fiji to have more responsible packaging. So that I feel better about drinking it.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, I just love Fiji water. And also we watched that special with Zac Efron where he talked about water.
Yeah.
And that really shaped my worldview of water.
Yeah. Oh, here's a pro
But
tip.
I don't know how to drink the good water without finding single-use plastic.
So for our listeners, just because I really thought that TV show episode was really interesting, that Zac Efron show. I forget what it's called.
It's on Netflix.
It's Zac Efron is the host of it, and some other dude, right? Isn't it
Can I
two
just
dudes?
search it? I'm going to click really loud. It is called Down to Earth with Zac Efron, and he is with, Darren Olean to find healthy, sustainable ways to live. But they go multiple places. Like they spend some time in Italy and like whatever talking about. Like he's basically trying to tell you that there you can find good, healthy things no matter where you are. It's just a matter of like how you take care of yourself along with it.
Isn't the Italy one about the Sicilian population with a bunch of octogenarians?
Yeah, because they have like the highest population of people who are that age, and they're like, "How do you do it?" And he talks to this old man who's like 100, I think, actually, or like
something like that. I can't remember.
But he was basically like, "Oh, I never stopped drinking and I never stopped eating pasta." And Zac Efron was like, "You mean the first two things I cut out of my diet?"
Yeah.
But in one of those episodes, Anna Kendrick is in it with him, and they're at a place in California.
It's like a water bar.
Yeah,
it's
like
the
a
most
water bar.
ridiculous. Like it seems like a really ridiculous thing,
yeah.
but it is kind of interesting because in the episode they talked about how everyone, like when you go to the store and you see a package of water and it says like it's distilled. Yeah. Everyone's like, "Oh, that means it has its impurities removed," and basically it's just like, well, I mean, it is, but the question is whether or not you want to have certain impurities removed from your water. So, yeah, you don't really, because there's actually good stuff in water.
And you need some of them.
That you need, that your body needs.
Anyways, this is my appeal to Big Oil to find a way to either, one, actually recycle my plastic, or two, for Fiji to contact me to figure out how to set up a spring here.
Set up a spring. Could you come just pour a bunch of your water?
Artesian water. Oh, it's from the islands. They're probably not going to get it here, are they?
I mean...
Dang it.
I have a lot of questions about how you think spring water works, but...
Well, there's a spring out by my parents' house. I think that's what I'm thinking of.
Well, sure.
Because we could actually take bottles out there and, like, fill it. It was really good.
Oh, we sure could.
But it
wouldn't taste like that.
No.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. So I need to figure out a way for Fiji to get the water from the islands here is what I'm saying. Anyways, welcome to Ohio.
Yeah, well, welcome to Ohio. Welcome to our podcast. This is 16 to 1. We talk about education and stuff. This week, we're covering a topic that is timely.
And near and dear to our hearts.
In a way. So, yeah.
One half of my heart.
We probably should have done this one before now, but
Okay, but I have suggested this topic, and we've always been like, no, we're living it. We don't need to research it.
Sure. We're talking about...
a little too close to the source.
We're talking about, this week, Betsy DeVos. And we're talking about her now because we had planned to talk about her when we looked up, when we were brainstorming show topics
2 summers ago.
Yeah, 2 summers ago. We had been like, oh, we should talk about Betsy DeVos and why everyone is so up in arms about her, because I think at the time we were brainstorming, she was doing some dumb bull. We were like, I'll bleep myself there. She was doing some dumb stuff.
This week we've just decided we will bleep ourselves.
I mean, there might be some bleeps in this. I don't know. I feel like, a weight has been lifted, and so I just might curse. But anyway.
Let it fly.
So, so back at the time we were brainstorming, we put her on because we thought she's an interesting and divisive figure, and not everybody understands why her appointment as the Secretary of Education is so problematic.
Yeah.
And I think it became easy in the Trump era to think of a lot of problems that way. Like, they kind of became instantly divisive, and you picked a side, and you didn't necessarily go to the depths of understanding why you would be on that side or the other or whatever it was. Because it was just a climate of divisiveness, and it still is in this country. But I think it's worth doing a deep dive into her and like why, because I think what she represents and like the problems that she brought to the Department of Education and her home state of Michigan, and like everything that Betsy DeVos represents, is not, the problems are not going to go away just because she's going out of office. So we're kind of talking about her, we're giving her a little send off because she'll be vacating the office. So we're giving her this little send off by trash talking her for a while, but also like just explaining why it's so problematic.
Right. And I think it's important to note that even though Betsy wouldn't have been my choice, her failure is not good for anyone. So, like, we're looking at something from the lens of, like, okay, I don't, agree with you holistically on anything, but had she shown up and done, what she should have, then I could have been like, okay, great, this is fine. But this is one of those positions where her not succeeding is only harmful to everyone.
And I also think she was kind of set up to fail, and we'll talk about why, but she was basically heinously unprepared for a job steering public schools in America. She just doesn't. We were researching this, and Kate did a lot of work finding some stuff on her background, and I was like, I was reading through Kate's research before I was doing mine, and I was like, oh, well, I should go find some stuff about her background in education. She doesn't have one. There's nothing to find. It's not because there was nothing.
No, I promise I did my homework.
Yeah, Kate did her homework, and I was like, oh, maybe I'll just go add to this a little bit, but there was literally nothing to add. So, Anyway.
Where do we start this story?
Yeah. So, I mean, a bit of framing. The heart of the controversy here, the real meat and potatoes of the issue, is an argument that's been ongoing for a while now in the American school system that's just like, what do we do when schools don't do as well as we think they should? And answers to that have been proposed kind of fall into two camps. And one is, well, we should consider privatizing public education, which means, privatizing is, I think, a little bit of a misleading word there, because in practice what it means is that there are these privately run schools and charter schools and religious schools and other kinds of schools that are not your typical public school in America. They receive government funding to educate their students on like a per student basis, and they aren't regulated in the same way that public schools are regulated. So they're not really using the same rule book, but they're getting dollars that otherwise would have gone to public education.
Sure.
So one way of solving this problem is, like I just talked about, like set up a charter system. The other way of solving this problem is stop defunding education.
Oh, I think I've heard that somewhere before.
Yeah. So there's like this quote from one of our sources that I found in there, just like talking about charter schools is like, by allowing experimentation, proponents of charter schools argue, and by breaking the power of teachers unions, districts will somehow be able to innovate their way past the crushing underfunding that afflicts majority minority school districts all around the country, which I think is a funny take. That's got to be from the Times. I think it's from the Times article that I linked. So anyway, the other side is like, well, you know what, if we consider education to be a fundamental right, or at the very least, if we acknowledge that we have compulsory education laws in this country, like, we have to go to school. So, if we at least acknowledge the very baseline, perhaps what we should do is ensure a healthy amount of funding for the public education sector, since we expect every single kid from when they're 6 to when they're 17, 18 or something like that to have an education. If we expect that, then we should probably put our money where our mouths are and fund it. My particular take on this is that I don't necessarily think that charter options are doomed to fail, but I do think that unless and until we can fund public education at the level where it needs to be funded, we probably shouldn't be diverting money to charter schools.
Probably not.
Because we should have healthy public options first and foremost, and not force schools to compete for ever dwindling amounts of education funding. Mm-hmm. So anyway, that's kind of the heart of the matter, and the reason that that's the heart of the matter is because of Betsy DeVos's background, which...
or lack thereof.
Lack of background in education. I really liked... I'm going to back up a little bit later, but I really liked how you put, like, how did she end up as Secretary of Education? And you're like, she went to school?
Question mark?
That's
all I could come up with.
Because that's the background. Her background is in education.
She was once a student.
Attended school. So anyway, yeah, let's just get into how Betsy ended up as the Secretary of Education. A little bit about her background, her family, her views.
Can I begin by telling you what she has that most educators will never have?
Sure.
Just as a reference point.
I would love to know.
Is that okay to start with?
Of course.
So the DeVos family has 10 boats. One of them is 163 feet long. It's worth $40 million. That one boat, not the fleet. They have 4 airplanes. They have 2 helicopters. She and her husband have a shared net worth of $5.1 billion, and they alone have $580 million in just assets. And just for fun, she has a 22,000 square foot summer home in Holland, Michigan, which is where she's from.
It's a McMansion. It's really ugly.
So, for starters, we're not really screaming an understanding of public education.
Mm-hmm. And why is that?
Because ain't none of us working in this here field got anything like that. Let me rephrase that for you.
No, I think it's quite fine.
Because as an educator, when I see that this is the lady who's passing out the money, she doesn't know what it's like. Like, this is what this tells me. She's so far from my reality of what it's like to make, I think I started off making like $32,000 a year 8 years ago. Mm-hmm. Like, that isn't anything that I just listed there for reference. Mm-hmm. So not that she couldn't do those things and be Batman, but she also chose to not be Batman.
I think this is another part of, it's really interesting to know that's what she has. I think this is part of the kind of divisive nature of stuff because people looked at that and immediately wrote her off. So I think you're right to say it's not necessarily the case that somebody with that much wealth can't understand.
Oh, no, that's not my problem at all. But to know these things, and then in addition.
Yeah.
The other problem with this, and I think I mentioned it later, is that Trump's cabinet is one of the most wealthy of all time. Mm-hmm. So she fits in, there. Mm-hmm. But for educators to look at her and to know she has no background in education and then to know what she's sitting on, it's very upsetting. And to know her staunch, support of anything that is in public education. Mm-hmm. It's very upsetting.
What's her, so part of the objection to her was kind of her family background, her history of, I guess I would say, like, kind of lobbying interests in Michigan.
Yeah.
Her family's history of lobbying.
It's kind of a perfect storm here for Betsy and how she ended up with this opportunity. So her dad, Betsy DeVos's father, was Edgar Prince, and he created the Prince Corporation, and they were a manufacturing company, and they also then later sort of branched out into automotive industry stuff. So obviously being in Michigan, that was a huge thing. Mm-hmm. And so the year after her father died, Betsy's dad died, her mom sold the business, and it was for more than $1 billion. So there's some pretty serious money to start with. Her dad, Edgar Prince, co-founded a group called the Family Research Council, and they were an American fundamentalist Protestant activist group, which is they were an affiliated lobbying organization.
Still exist, right?
Yes. Yeah. And so they've changed their mission a little bit, but it was at one point, quote, to advance faith, family, and freedom in public policy and the culture from a Christian worldview. So essentially what they support as far as lobbying for policies in government is that they want to, this is not going to surprise you at all, but it opposes and lobbies against access to porn, embryonic stem cell research, abortion, divorce, LGBT rights. So they, anti-discrimination laws, same-sex marriage, same-sex civil unions, and the LGBT adoption options. So they're basically saying we're not going to give any money to any of these things, and we're actually going to speak out against all of these groups of people. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so that's her dad. Mm-hmm. Her brother, you know a little bit more about than I did, but her brother is Eric Prince, and he was a Navy SEAL, and he was famous because he founded the private military company called Blackwater.
Blackwater USA, yeah, it's like a paramilitary group, and it was...
And he worked for them until 2009. Murderous. Yeah, they did kill some people as its chairman. And then he sold it in 2010. But now he's in charge of this private equity firm called Frontier Resource Group.
Yeah,
is the chairman of the Hong Kong listed Frontier Services Group. So he, not only having, being Betsy's brother, has that kind of foundation, but he also has kind of ventured off into this interesting world. And he was pro-Trump even before Betsy was pro-Trump. Mm-hmm. So we already have like that going. So that's just her side of the family. So now her father-in-law is a guy named Richard DeVos. He was an American billionaire. He was a co-founder of Amway, and he was the owner of the Orlando Magic basketball team. So in 2012, he died in 2018, but in 2012, Forbes listed him as the 60th wealthiest person in the U.S. and the 205th in the world, and his net worth was over $5.1 billion. So that's father-in-law. And then her husband, his name is also Richard, but they call him Dick. And he's basically just... I don't know how to say this other than this, but essentially he used what his dad created as far as businesses, and then was a chairman and that kind of stuff. And then Betsy tried a few things that didn't go so well. So essentially what Betsy has here is that she came from extreme wealth, married extreme wealth, and then used that money to run her way around Michigan and was an intense figure of the Republican Party there. But Betsy, as you found, was one of the largest investors and losers in the blood testing company Theranos.
Oh, I threw these bits in here because I thought it was kind of fun. It's just kind of funny. It's more proof that even if you're born into enormous wealth, you don't necessarily have business acumen.
Keen sense of,
so even the things that you would think that she would be good at, which would be spending money that she didn't earn, essentially, she's not good at that either. She invested in Theranos, which was essentially fraud. It was just the company was completely made up. The claims Elizabeth Holmes was the founder of it, and she claimed she could do something with blood testing that she could not in fact do. And there have been all kinds of investigations and scandalous stuff.
Bad.
So anyway,
she kept losing money. So the other one is that the DeVosses were producers for a Broadway run of a stage play called Scandalous: The Life and Trials of Amy Semple McPherson. And it was in 2012, and it was based on the life of this famous evangelist. And it was a book featured and it features a book and lyrics written by Kathy Lee Gifford, which is my favorite part of the sentence.
Wow. It ran for 3 weeks.
Yeah, and it closed immediately. So there's another
negative reviews.
Money pit that the DeVosses just chucked some cash at and hoped it would, I don't know.
They really are singularly dedicated to their notion of Christianity.
They are.
Everything, and again, I say their notion of it because my notion of Christianity as a Christian is very different from what their notion of Christianity is. But anyway,
essentially what this all does, though, is it gives her an extreme security to, fund these things that
it's a little concerning that somebody with that much money, at least in her case, it seems like she's never really been held accountable because there's no
she hasn't, because it's just all been
there's no downside if you waste a couple $1 million on a Broadway play that flops. What's one drop in the giant ocean,
the $1 billion whatever,
right?
Yeah. And that's just her and her husband, so that's just part of the family's wealth as far as that's concerned. So not that having successful parents and the security and stuff is a bad thing, but it's that what they did have and how they've used it has not been for the betterment of what it could have been. Which is where a lot of other problems with Betsy come up.
How did she end up as the Secretary of Education anyway?
She did go to school.
Yeah, this is the part that I thought was funny.
That's all I wrote.
This is the part of the show where I was like, oh, well, here we will outline the path that
made
it clear why she became involved in...
And then you sat down on the couch and you're like, I'm going to research this. And I was like, I bet you are.
I don't know why. I just maybe I just blocked this out of my mind from when it came up 4 years ago when she was confirmed. But because I remember being very distraught about her at that point, but I think it had more to do with what she did do in Michigan with the charter school system there. That seemed to me to be pretty evident, but I guess I didn't at the time look.
That there was absolutely no background.
Yeah, I didn't go look into her background as an educator because I assumed she had one because she was so involved with the Michigan charter school system. So
no, that was just throwing money. Again.
She wasn't involved with education. She just had a lot of money.
Betsy did go to school. She went to the Holland Christian High School. She grew up in a private school.
Yeah.
K-12, the whole way.
She grew up going to a private school.
Yeah. And that's in Holland, Michigan, which is where she's from. That's where her summer home is. And then she attended Calvin College in Grand Rapids. And she, it's a private religious school institution. Yeah. And that was in Michigan as well, obviously. And she earned a Bachelor of Arts in Business Economics there in 1979. And that's her education. So she went to a private K-12 all the way through, and then a private university as well.
So not only does she not have a professional background as an educator, she didn't even attend any public school ever.
Well, and on top of that, all 4 of her children graduated from private schools. And then even one of them, she briefly homeschooled because of how she said the teenagers were very catty.
I mean, she's not wrong about that.
No, she's not. But I think that's interesting, though, because normally if you're paying for, a private thing like this, you're probably not going to yank them out to homeschool them. But she chose to do that briefly. But she's only ever also, on top of all of these things, supported financially private schools that align with her religious beliefs. And so she really, truly has no idea what a public school looks like or how they work because they do not align with her core beliefs, and she can't throw money at it to make it what she wants it to be.
That's the thing is like one can almost, you could almost say it's difficult to fault her for not knowing anything about public education because she very obviously, like very clearly knows nothing about public education. So like, the fact that somebody decided to put her in charge of public education.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So another problem with her is that she really messed up Michigan.
So in addition to using her wealth only to fund private schools, she also used some of her wealth to kind of bully the state of Michigan into a deregulated hellscape of charter schools. Michigan, it's allowed 80% of its charters to be operated by for-profit educational management organizations. And that's compared to like only 16% of charters nationwide being run by for-profit companies. And this was like basically her experiment in Michigan. She was like, she looked at basically what was, before she messed with it, an average kind of middle of the pack public school system and was like, you know what we really need? We need school choice. She strongly advocated for voucher programs and charter schools in Michigan. And it created this highly, highly, highly competitive landscape, but also completely diverted money away. Like, there's a set size of the pot when it comes to educational funding. And when you set up a charter system like this, what you're doing is taking money away from public education and funneling it into private education. Therefore, what you claim you're doing is creating competition between supposedly equal value school districts or schools or charter schools or whatever. What you claim to be doing is creating competition there that motivates each one of these 2 different kinds of schools to be better than it is. But what you're in effect doing is just gutting the funding of one and giving it to the other and then claiming the competition is fair. What in fact happened in Michigan is that the charter schools that did come into existence because of this funding system tanked so badly in terms of student performance that Michigan is now in like the bottom, I forget what percentile of public school systems in, or just school performance in the country. So Michigan went from being a kind of middle of the road state to being among the worst states for educating kids in this country. And that all happened under the watchful eye of Betsy DeVos and her insistence that the way to solve school problems is by setting up charter networks. So anyway.
Well, one of the other big problems with this, and this was something that was highly scrutinized anyways as Trump took office and began to fill cabinets and secretaries and things like that, was that Obama's second Secretary of Education who followed Duncan was a guy named John King. And he was, in like historically speaking, one of the most qualified to ever fill that role. Like, he had a doctorate in education, he had a law degree, he was a principal of a charter school, and he was a high school social studies teacher in Puerto Rico. So to go, the contrast is immense, obviously, because we're talking about, in this case, John King was someone who had an experience that most people who had ever done that job, lacked. So if you want to compare John King to her, that's one of the first problems that educators had with her. But to be fair, there have absolutely been other unqualified people to hold this position and other positions within cabinets. But they're most normally given to someone who is a lawyer. So it isn't unheard of in the U.S. for someone like her to end up in a cabinet, but that doesn't mean it's a good choice. Especially when considering her extreme support of charter and private schools and no info or any sort of knowledge on public schools, especially considering that's the majority of the U.S. education system.
I mean, that's really the heart of it to me, is it's just like, you never attended a public school, your kids don't attend public schools, you'd never have tried to fund public schools, you've never even really tried to understand the thing that you are now in charge of. And again, somebody made a bad choice putting her in office, right? So it's like, it's almost, you wouldn't expect her to succeed as Secretary of Education. So she never should have been appointed. But you just, it's like, well, I have no background or expertise in this subject, so I probably shouldn't be put in charge of this subject.
She barely made it also because, so November 23, 2016, then President-elect Trump announced that he would nominate her to be the Secretary of Education. So on January 31st, following strong opposition to the nomination from Democrats, the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions approved her nomination on a party line vote, sending her to the Senate floor, then that nomination to the Senate floor. So on February 7th, 2017, she was confirmed by the Senate by a 51-50 margin, which means that Vice President Pence had to break the tie in favor of her nomination. And that vote, that 51-50, included 2 Republicans, Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, that refused to vote in support of her. But this was the first time in the U.S. history that a cabinet nominee's confirmation was decided by the vice president's tie-breaking vote. So even Republicans were like, this is not the move. Other problems of Betsy, well, she had no real reason to be considered for this job. Also because, like I mentioned earlier, Trump's cabinet is one of the wealthiest of all time, which is a bunch more issues for some. But like I also previously mentioned, her brother did have ties to Trump. And so she and her husband didn't actually give money to Trump at first, but they did give millions to that Senate that ended up confirming her. So those are some of my issues, just to start.
Yeah.
And obviously the money that she did give did its job, because it got her this gig.
Let's get into a little bit of a retrospective about what she actually did do.
Yes.
I talked about Michigan, the whole, like, this is before she was, so this is like 1990s and 2000s. Before she was Secretary of Education, she was doing all this stuff in Michigan.
Right. To promote, privatizing it.
Yeah. There was like this, I just remember I was looking it up and researching, there was this 2016 analysis by the Education Trust Midwest. It's a nonpartisan education policy research organization. It found that 70% of Michigan charter schools were in the bottom half of the state's rankings. And it has the most for-profit charter schools in the country and some of the least oversight. So, and that's all kind of what she was up to. Yeah. Fast forward again to her confirmation hearing, which was definitely started out her tenure with a bang. Do you want to cover what?
I just want the last one, but I can do this. Okay.
No, I mean, yeah.
So her confirmation hearing was 2017. For starters, she couldn't address fundamental questions about the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, including whether states and like other places would have to comply with that. Like, so she didn't understand.
She doesn't understand. So, like, what you were talking about, at least with people who are lawyers who get nominated cabinet positions,
they would know
answer law
the
questions.
Requirements of.
She can't answer law questions.
Like, they would know that. She didn't know the difference between proficiency and growth. And so if you're going to be in charge of education, you should probably be able to know, at least roughly what those two things mean.
What does that mean? I would love to go back and look up, like, how she answered questions about that.
She just skirted around most of them. There weren't too many direct
even
responses.
just, like, outside of the educational context, how do you not understand the difference between proficiency and growth?
And she wouldn't ever really go into if she believed that guns did belong in schools or whether for-profit charters that receive public funding should be held to the same standards as public schools. But the most memorable moment of all of this, at least for educators that I knew,
confirmation hearing.
During the confirmation hearing was that when talking about if guns belonged in schools, she talked about a school in Montana that might need a gun to protect themselves against a potential grizzly.
A grizzly bear.
Yeah, so that was her response for why schools in Montana might.
like people should be able to have guns in schools because of grizzly bears.
Well, her example was that, you know, if you're in Montana and a bear walks into school, then
sounds like a beginning of a bad joke.
Or you just don't have a pot of honey to drag it out with.
Interesting.
You're welcome.
Okay, so what did
Come on, that was so much better than you gave me credit for. But anyways, that moment for me as an educator, I was like, oh, this is exactly what we thought it was.
This is exactly what everybody thought it would be, given her history of no background in education.
It went as expected. So basically, her timeline explodes immediately. So March of that year, so 2017, she has been in her position for what? Let's not even call it 2 months, maybe. So March of 2017, she supports Trump's budget proposal / funding for Department of Ed by 13.5%. And that was a collective $9 billion in cuts to education, including, of course, after-school programs, career and tech ed, and programs to hire and train teachers. But what did this thing do for her? Oh, it helped build up $250 million worth of vouchers while rolling back education spending to pre-2002 levels. Now, the note does say that the Republican-controlled Congress rejected her entire request, but it still means that from the very beginning, she was already attacking public education, which is a problem.
Yeah. It looks like we fast forward in the timeline here a bit. We're going to end up in... We're just kind of hitting the...
These are the big
best
ones.
The best hits, the best of DeVos.
Well, and that March 2017 one is so huge because we're talking about $9 billion they cut immediately to education. So March 2019, in a testimony before a House subcommittee, Betsy struggles to defend her proposal to cut another $7 billion from education programs. And that included eliminating all $18 million in federal funding for the Special Olympics.
I remember that.
Which also builds on her not knowing anything about the Disabilities Act.
Yeah, she just
makes me crazy.
I remember that was like a media moment when everyone was like, not the Special Olympics.
Yeah. In that same subcommittee, she failed to justify her claim that, quote, students may be better served by being in larger classes.
God. Okay, literally all education research that exists
suggests that smaller is better.
We need to decrease class sizes. See, this is one of the things in America that, like, decreasing funding for education has done. It's increased class sizes. And when you increase class sizes and don't increase funding for teacher pay, you have fewer teachers and more students. And that means that you have fewer minutes per student a teacher can spend in a fixed amount of time. And it's not good. It's not good. It hurts educational gains.
So along with trying to cut more money from special ed and preventing programs for students that are blind to be, supported in any sort of way. But in addition to that, there was the Rep. Hayes. She's from the 5th District of Connecticut, Congresswoman. She's a former National Teacher of the Year. And so as part of that questioning, Betsy basically declined to say that she would prevent the use of federal ed money to arm and train teachers. And so she had been pushed on this idea of, are you going to force teachers to be armed? Is this how we're going to use our money?
This is the dystopia we're in. This representative was just asking DeVos whether or not she would use federal money to
do those things
into the hands of teachers and train them on the use of firearms.
And she wouldn't say no.
Was like, I'm not going to answer that, I guess.
But she's going to keep cutting money from special education and students with disabilities. So
on to July of 2019.
That was May or March of 2019. So July of 2019, the Department of Ed dismisses LGBTQ plus student discrimination complaints. And according to a report by the Center for American Progress under DeVos, the Ed Department is 9 times less likely than the Obama administration was to take action on Title IX complaints related to sexual orientation or gender. And so that was also all because they had reversed most of the Obama-era guidelines affirming protections for transgender students. This also built on, and I think I'll mention it later as well, that she was eliminating protection for students who were assaulted or raped or something like sexually assaulted or raped on school grounds or campuses or something like that as part of,
there were a lot of Title IX rollbacks.
Yes.
Title IX lost a lot of its teeth under the DeVos.
Yes.
Position.
And so it made students a lot more vulnerable, people a lot more vulnerable because they didn't have that protection anymore. And that was one of the things that the Obama era had really beefed up as far as, protecting all kinds of people.
And the way the DeVos administration spun this was like, oh, well, we're protecting the rights of everyone, including the accused.
Yeah, because they wanted to give the accused a chance to interrogate the person that had...
When your commander-in-chief is...
Never mind.
A sexual predator.
Yes.
You have to roll back protections for
other people who
victims
might be attacked
of
by
sexual
someone they
predation. Anyway,
So February of 2020, jumping ahead, Trump DeVos budget proposal for the fiscal year of 2021 is going to slash, or was to slash, education funding by 6.1 billion, another 8.4%.
oh my gosh, how many percentages are left?
Yeah.
We already got it was 16 and a half or something that she proposed at the beginning, 8.4% here.
But tax credits could divert up to 5 billion in taxpayer money to private schools. Did you see that coming?
No,
Was
I
that a
had
surprise?
no idea that would be coming.
March of 2020, this is a real slap in the face. DeVos moves to end the public service loan forgiveness program because, quote, our proposal is to sunset the public service loan forgiveness program. The administration feels that incentivizing one type of work and one type of job over another is not called for. I was at a district where this actually directly affected them. For Southeastern Ohio, there were, if you were, one of these types of teachers, you could have more of your loans forgiven if you gave so much service time. And that's what actually a lot of schools use in their favor as part of a hiring technique to say, if you work here for this many years, you'll get this much. And again,
this kind of thing, all it does is weaken the position of the public sector for education, because teachers are already chronically underpaid. It's like, oh, let's target one of the few perks that might kind of a little bit make up for the fact that you're going to be so underpaid. This loan forgiveness stuff. Okay, let's just eliminate that too. Okay,
moving on. Okay, so July of 2019, we do see some of these Title IX complaints, but May of 2020, that actual rule is changed. That includes a provision that permits accused rapists to cross-examine their victims.
Okay, this is what I was thinking about.
So that was my mistake. We already see it being rolled back, Title IX stuff, in the previous year.
No, I think you're right. I think you were right. I think I misspoke because I was lumping in this thing. Okay. But it was just I think what I meant to say was just the general position of attacking Title IX regulations was... They claim from the beginning the whole point of it was to protect the accused.
Yes.
Right.
So yes.
Yeah. Anyway.
So and she's really been busy. So May 2020, they block emergency COVID aid to DACA students. Those are the Dreamers, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So those are the Dreamers. So while the Federal CARES Act had set aside more than $6 billion for emergency financial grants to college students to help them pay for whatever they needed, DeVos specifically excluded immigrant students who desperately needed that help.
This was pandemic-related funding.
Yes. Yeah. Along with that, DeVos seizes on the chance to steer hundreds of millions of dollars in public money away from public schools and students and to private businesses and corporations. So from D.C., DeVos used federal coronavirus relief funds to create a $180 million voucher program for private and religious schools and has ordered states to redistribute CARES Act funds to private schools.
So CARES Act funding is supposed to be federal funding for businesses affected by the coronavirus and a shutdown and stuff. And she's like, oh, you know what? I'll just yoink a little bit of that funding and slip it on over here to the private. So this is completely consistent with everything she did in Michigan. Yeah, there are no surprises here, really.
No, it's not like we've unearthed anything. She's just playing exactly by her playbook. The last thing I wanted to mention as part of May of 2020 is that her family gave $250,000 to promote the lies of voter fraud and mail-in ballots being at risk. And that's especially important in Michigan, as that is a very hotly debated state right now. So she was actively giving in May to help discredit the media now,
sowing
and
the seeds,
to discredit voter fraud.
She's sowed the seeds that are now being reaped because everyone thinks not everyone, half the country thinks something about the election was fraudulent.
Right. And so obviously that's a perfect political play because they knew in May that there was no way everyone was going to be able to vote in person in November. So her family was quick to give to that. And then finally, the last thing that I have included on the Betsy DeVos timeline of bullshit is July of 2020. She threatened to withhold funding from public schools for not fully reopening in the middle of a pandemic, but when asked about having a safe reopening plan, she did not have an answer to that question. In conclusion, she sucks. I am eagerly awaiting what's next.
Yeah. I guess to me, it would seem, and again, this is just my viewpoint, but it would seem that recognizing her failure in leadership as head of our, country's education system, it doesn't even have to be a partisan issue. It is, but even a non-partisan analysis of this could just be you know what? She didn't know anything about education. She came in, she thought she knew. She thought, I'm even willing to say that she genuinely thinks that, private and charter systems are what is best for students. Because she apparently enjoyed them and benefited from them her entire life, which is, fine. Okay, fine. You want to bolster. But that should not come at the cost of the destruction of the public school system. which is exactly just what happened. Yeah, so I guess
that's all bad about Betsy.
Yeah.
I mean, and that, like what you said, it's not like she became the bad guy. She was. Like, everything that she did at the federal level is exactly what she did at the state level. It's no different. So for Trump to have chosen her,
well, she's not even just
exactly what she would do.
Right. But I don't even think she's just the bad guy. I just think she's the totally unqualified guy. Like,
I mean, the bad guy for public education.
Well, yeah. For public education, she is like the Antichrist figure, because everything she has done for school systems anywhere has been to undermine support for public options and to redirect support toward private options. So it's just like kryptonite. She's the kryptonite of the public school system. She just goes into them wherever they exist and sucks all the energy and dollars out of them. And she was just uniquely unqualified to serve in that position.
I like that.
She as a phrase. She really was. She was uniquely unqualified.
Incredibly unqualified, I would say.
Yeah. Just so we don't end this on a really dismal note.
Can I hype up Jill?
Yeah, well, what comes next? How do we fix this mess?
Okay, so to end on a positive note, would you like to do that?
Yeah, I would.
Does
love
that sound
to.
good? Do we want to?
Yeah, I just want to
forget about Betsy briefly.
I do want to forget about Betsy. I want to forget about the entire point of this episode, and I want to focus for a minute on where do we go from here? What comes next?
I was really excited to hear Joe Biden's speech on Saturday night when he was confirmed or anticipated to be the winner, obviously, as we're still dealing with that. But he made a comment during his speech that he was excited for teachers to have a teacher in the White House. And that kind of makes me choked up just to think about it, because I'm so excited to have, in his case, his wife, Jill, who isn't just his wife, Jill, by any means. She's a doctor who has been a teacher and has worked in education her entire life and who still is a professor. Mm-hmm. And so
she said she plans to keep teaching.
Yeah, I mean, she's going to keep teaching. But so I'm not saying she's going to fill this role or something like that, but I am just personally excited to know that, you know, one of the most powerful men in the world has a teacher for a wife. And so that that's not something he will take lightly, and it's something that he obviously values, and that they're the Bidens and the Harris and like her, you know, like all of them value education deeply. And so I'm very excited to see that just as a presence in the White House. Like I said, we have no idea who his cabinet will be. Hopefully we don't have to have a follow-up episode that's like this about this new one. But I'm just personally, as a teacher and as a woman, I'm excited that Joe Biden will be somewhere near it, because I trust her work. And she's an English teacher, so what else do we need?
Yeah. I mean, I think even I personally don't know a whole lot about Jill Biden. I don't think she'll necessarily have an outstanding role in Biden's policy, but I do think that just even being, you know, having your life be informed in such an intimate way by somebody who is an educator can make a huge difference. So, I mean, he's got an actual education plan. Again, you can even, it seems to me like you can be excited for the future of public education in this country, even in a nonpartisan way, because Biden being Biden, I'm not even all that excited about Biden as a person, like politically, but the fact that he's got a plan for funding public education that is not just like destroy it and divert all money toward charter and private schools, like the fact that there is a plan to address a lot of the systemic inequalities that we've been dealing with for a really long time, and then also to undo some of the damage that has been done by Trump era policies, that heartens me. It just heartens me to imagine that we might stop like bleeding money out of the public education system. And it's kind of a low bar, right, to even say it's like nice to not just be losing money. It'd be like the bar really should be set at funding our education system way more than we fund it now, and way more competitively with other developed countries. Like we have fallen so far behind our peers in the world. We just don't have an education system. Like, I don't mean like individual teachers, I just mean the system itself is broken in so many ways, especially compared to our peers. And to me, it's just heartening to know whoever it would have been, you know, elected, whoever's in office, it's just heartening to imagine that they care about the public education system, because it's just, I keep coming back to this again and again. It sort of seems like my theme for this podcast, but like if we want to treat education as a fundamental right that if we want to believe that everybody should have the option to have a good education, then it's just like everything else flows from that. So I'm just excited because all other things considered, it seems like there's an opportunity here to restore something that's been lost.
Well, that's all I'm saying. I do not believe that Joe Biden will save public education, but I'm excited for there to be a voice of education in the House and literally the White House, what I mean. And I mean, she's worked with people with disabilities. She has worked with high school. She's worked at community colleges. So she's really seen a lot of education that most people, like I haven't even experienced all of those things like she has. So like I said, I'm just excited to have somebody there who has the experience, who has the education, who has the voice for it. And so I think that's going to be at least one step in the right direction. And also one last thing, Joe Biden even mentioned in his speech when he was accepting it or, announcing himself as president-elect, he even talked about people with disabilities as being part of a voting population, and they've never really been recognized in that way. And so to read about and to talk about now all of the things that DeVos has done to eliminate the help and support that people with disabilities needs, I can imagine how, exciting that must have been to hear the next president talk about them in a way that identifies them as important and that they'll be supported. So that's not a bad thing. That's for sure.
Yep.
Especially when our current president mocks people with, disabilities. So.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing to me is it's just like, we're moving on from an era where we looked down on various people, various systems, various jobs. We looked down as a nation, the rhetoric that happened because of what's been here for the last 4 years. It's became a nation where we look down on teachers because like, oh, stop whining, you need to go do your job during the pandemic. Or we looked down on people with disabilities because we could mock them in our rallies. We looked down on, just whomever.
All kinds of people.
We looked down on the public education system, which to me is a grave injustice. Like we need to acknowledge that there are problems with the public education system, but we also need to acknowledge what those problems actually are and not pretend like there's something else. So the real problems are not that public schools are doomed to fail. The problem is that
they don't have the support to succeed.
When you slash funding over and over and over again, when you don't make teacher pay competitive, when you don't give students the time they need one-on-one with educators because of large class sizes, when you have districts that have been historically underfunded because of things like redlining and all kinds of racial and wealth disparities, when you have a system that is plagued by these systemic issues, and then you refuse to acknowledge those issues and also refuse to direct any funding to try to alleviate some of these issues, it's just, you end up with where we are now. But I just want to say that I really do have faith as a product of, public school system K-12, and as somebody who is, obviously around a lot of my friends are public school teachers. I just really believe in the institution. And
I believe in it. I live it every day, and I have absolute faith in what my coworkers and my friends and other educators do. But man, a little bit more money, a little bit more support can go a long way to help this.
Yeah.
So we're not asking for a lot, just some minimal support.
But that's the thing, is it like
maybe a secretary who has spent a day in a classroom.
But that's the thing, is it like I want us to be in a place where public school teachers can tell the world what they need and it can be given to them, Like I just with the amount of money that we spend on weird things in this country, especially the military, it just seems like a few of those dollars could maybe be diverted to making the world a better place through education. Anyway,
last week's question.
Fill in the blank.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Last week 2 weeks ago, our last episode was all about falling down rabbit holes. And so the question for that episode was, what was Lewis Carroll's real name?
The answer is Charles Dodgson, which I really didn't know it was a pen name.
I didn't either.
And I can't really say it was a very English last name. Dogson. Dodgson. I don't know. Anyway. Dogson.
So this week's question, you ask it.
Oh, sure. So the question this week is, what happens when a voter on a punch card ballot only succeeds in detaching a little bit of perforated paper rather than fully punching it all the way through.
Yes. What's that called?
There's a specific name for it.
Mm-hmm. Actually, there's a few variations of this.
Yeah.
There's also called... Well, I won't do that because it'll give it away.
Yeah.
We can do it next week.
There are variations of this phenomenon, but this one is specifically about what happens when in a punch card ballot you attempt to make a choice and you only succeed in detaching a portion of the perforated paper and a portion of it and not the whole thing.
Yeah. Al Gore's still mad.
Al Gore's still mad about this phenomenon.
Anyways. Okay.
What did you learn this week?
I learned something the hard way.
Oh, what's that?
The last 2 weeks.
I did too. That's my last. I also learned something the hard way. So go ahead.
We have an ag shop at school, like
agriculture.
FFA, yeah.
For those in cities.
Yeah, sorry. I didn't even grow up in a school that had an ag shop, but all the schools I've been in since I've been working have had one. So anyways, super useful. Those kids can do all kinds of things. Our teacher can do all kinds of things to help us. So I'm on my way to work. I commute 45 minutes one way. And I'm almost to school, and I get the low pressure, air pressure thing for my tire.
It got cold.
Yeah. So it drops to whatever I need there. So I get to school and get a hold of the teacher, and I'm like, can I bring my car back to the shop and have someone just put some air in it? Like, because I was 45 minutes away, you weren't around, whatever. Okay. So I just had to get home essentially until it could really be fixed. So he's like, yeah, sure, we'll take care of it. So I go get my car later in the day. He's like, it's ready to go. I park it. Okay. So it's a Friday and I'm going to leave, and I get in my car, and I've just driven out of the parking lot, and my car has an automatic PSI reader. Like, I can go through and the car can tell me actually what the pressure is. So I'm about to turn on to a major road before I get on the interstate. And I just turn it on just to see what they filled it to see if they're even. And my Outback is supposed to have 35 PSI. My tires have been inflated to 51 PSI. Yes.
It's a bit of a crunchy ride.
I was beaming around, let me tell you. I was like floating, it felt like. So I call you stressed because I'm like, if I hit one little rock, I'm going to blow this thing.
You're going to explode and also possibly fly into the air.
Right. And then I'm going to take flight and I'm going to fly home. Okay, so I call you and I'm like, what do I even do? All four of my tires were at like 51 PSI. So I didn't have a pressure reader, obviously, because that would have fixed all of my problems. So instead, I just had to take my car key and let out air for a minute in each tire and then get back in my car and drive in circles around the parking lot on a Friday afternoon.
Oh boy.
Until it was down to like a level that I could drive it home.
You learned something useful though, and that's that you can let your air out of your tires with a key.
Yeah, I learned that.
Good job.
I learned that.
You learned that you should carry a tire pressure gauge in your car.
Maybe I should just have... Well, I had one, to be fair, and then my last car got totaled, but it was in there. So anyways, what I learned was I need a tire pressure gauge thing, and maybe just, next time I need to have someone else fill up my tires, I just tell them the PSI ahead of time.
Good.
So a bit of a story, but a very valuable lesson for a Friday afternoon. Because I was like ready to get home, and then I get in and I'm like, I'm going to explode. Yeah. I didn't. I'm fine. Now I need new tires. Go figure.
Glad you're okay.
So anyways, what'd you learn?
Oh, I learned something.
Way.
Yeah, I learned something
Twice.
the hard way too. Shh. Giving it away. I learned something the hard way too, and that something is read the product descriptions before you buy stuff online. I'm trying to put together this little gift basket basically, and in order to do that I needed a big, I wanted to do it in this like fancy little thing with like involving some like little wooden pallet crates basically, like little wooden crates.
Yeah,
I was like, oh, this will be cute, a little like hipstery presentation. We'll put in this little wooden crate. So I was like browsing Amazon, looking at crates, blah 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 blah, and I found this one, and like the price seemed about right, like it wasn't too expensive, but it was not cheap exactly, and I was like, okay, these will work. Put them in my cart, bought them. They arrived in 2 days or whatever, and the biggest one is like the size of my hand. Mind you, I wanted to put like 2
bottles of
wine bottles in here, a big jar of stuff. Like these things needed to be like,
they need space.
A couple feet,
of space
in them, and what I got was a couple inches
it's
of space.
Like maybe 5 by 3 inches.
Yeah. So when you're and that was from Amazon, our evil overlords Amazon. So that was from Amazon, and I did not read the product description, and that was on me. But I guess I kind of just assumed from the price what I would be getting, because they were expensive and they're tiny little dumb boxes. So anyway, Fast forward to today.
Were the bigger ones the same price?
I don't know. They're a little more expensive, but not that much more expensive.
But worth the money in comparison.
Yeah, apparently. Fast forward to today, we had to place an online, I guess this was last night, but we placed the order. We had to place an online order for groceries. I'm trying to make some pozole, which is this really tasty stuff that, like soup stuff that we make. And one of the ingredients in this pozole dish I make is hominy. And I was like, oh, we don't have any of that because it's kind of a, one-off ingredient that we don't use in our particular cuisine very often.
We're about to.
We were looking at this stuff on our online grocery store ordering so we could go pick it up tonight. And when you got home, because they loaded it in the back of the car because of COVID protocols and stuff, and when you got home, you opened the trunk and you found a 6-pound jar of hominy.
6 pounds, 4 ounces.
I wanted 28 ounces.
It was basically, that's like a healthy sized baby if it was born.
You put it next to the gallon of milk, and they're basically the same size, right? It was just like,
that's heavier.
It's just, it's very heavy. It's the biggest. I just wanted a small little can.
It looks like we bought hominy at like Costco or Sam's Club.
It does, but
it's
again,
like the equivalent.
Though this was deceiving because like the price, it was like under $4. Right?
For 6 pounds. Yeah, because when you buy in bulk, things are cheaper.
Apparently so. So like but it was like we were browsing and I saw the brand that I wanted. And I was like, oh, that's the brand I always get. Just grab that one. And there's only one option for that brand of hominy. I did not look.
But I even said, I was like, are you sure? Because this one is cheaper. It was smaller. And Chelsea goes, no, because we always get this brand. And I don't know how to make sure I get enough in this other brand. So now
the other brand option, to be fair to me, because I need to be fair to me, right? Everyone, please feel bad for me having made this mistake twice in a week. To be fair, I was like, we need more than just the one can of these other brands. And I always get this one brand. So let's just get that one brand. Didn't look at the size. Didn't look at it.
Yeah, so it was cheaper because it was a quarter of it or something.
We have a can that is the size of my torso sitting in our closet now, and we're gonna make 27 batches of hominy.
Yeah, you were like, oh, this is 4 times as much. I'm like, we've never put 1.5 pounds of hominy in anything at once.
We're gonna have a lot of hominy. We're gonna have to find. So here's the thing, listeners, you have an assignment for this week, and
find recipes for only hominy.
Find us some recipes that use hominy, yes.
Listeners, please don't do this.
We're already making pozole, so don't send us that one. But if you got other recipes involving hominy, canned hominy, we're all ears.
I'm on a diet.
Send it to hello@16to1.com. We will gladly, graciously accept any of your recommendations.
I didn't tell you about my diet. It excludes all hominy-related projects. Yeah. So none of that.
All right.
6 pounds of hominy later. New president. A new Secretary of Education on its way. 2021, the year of hominy. Get it? Not harmony. Hominy.
Wah, wah, wah.
Man, I mean, we should go back and compare our moods and the episodes leading up to it, and then this one. I think everyone will be like, ugh.
I know. We're finally energetic again. I'm really sorry, listeners, that we had to drag you through so much...
Truly.
Sadness.
Anyways, things are better now.
Things are better. They're looking up.
We've learned some really valuable lessons. I feel very qualified to appoint the next Secretary of Education based on just Betsy DeVos.
Oh, no, you are qualified to be the next Secretary of Education.
Compared to Betsy, yes. Yeah. One of my coworkers said that they were just waiting by their phone for the phone call just in case.
Just in case?
It's like, well, might as well be us. Can't get worse.
Good luck in your confirmation hearing, and we'll talk to you next time.
See you in 2 weeks.
Bye. Listeners, thanks for supporting 16 to 1.
We're trying to grow our audience, so please check us out at 16to1.com, all spelled out, and tell your friends about the show.
On our website, you can find links to follow us on social media, an archive of all our old episodes, and a contact form where you can get in touch.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you next show.
It's like we'd been constipated for 4 years and finally let out a big orange fart.